Hey everyone, my name is Ryan, and this is the Service Design Show, episode 222.
We hear it all the time. Designers need to understand business. But honestly, how many of us really know what that means? Today, we are diving deep into that question, and trust me, there is more to it than meets the eye. Hey, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what is truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. We often hear that designers need to understand business. But what does that mean in practice? Today, we are joined by Ryan Scott, a seasoned design leader who has tackled that question head on. With a career spanning major tech companies and accumulating in an MBA from Berkeley, Ryan has a unique perspective on bridging the gap between design and business. Now he's sharing his insights through Accelerate Design, his coaching practice dedicated to empowering design professionals. Oh, and did I mention he's also a shark diving enthusiast? So, in today's conversation, we are going to learn about what it really means to bring business thinking into your design work. Ryan shares the essential business skills every designer needs to develop. We'll explore how to avoid common pitfalls that can make designers feel like outsiders. You'll get practical tips on communicating with stakeholders and getting them on board with your ideas. You'll hear how you can demonstrate the value of design even when it's not always easy to measure. And we'll tackle the spicy question, is design being gaslighted? You know, I've always said that designers have the potential to be incredible salespeople. We're natural storytellers. We understand people's needs, and we're passionate about our ideas. But in this conversation with Ryan, I was reminded that we don't always tap into those skills. He's got some really insightful perspectives on how we can all become more persuasive and influential. And I think it's something we could all benefit from. Whether you're pitching a new project or just trying to get your team on board, this episode offers valuable insights. All right, let's jump into this conversation with Ryan Scott and stick around to the end. I've got some closing thoughts I think you'll find interesting. I'm your host, Mark Fontein, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Ryan, you told me that your wish is that designers would realize how broad their role actually is. Can you elaborate on what you mean with that?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I spent a lot of my career doing what was asked of me, and I didn't think to ask more questions than just kind of what was in front of me. So a PM would come to me and say, hey, this is the next priority. We need to build it. We probably need to build it in this way. And I, wanted to be a good collaborator and said, sure. And I just started jumping into the questions, the pixels, wireframes, personas, and just started kind of doing my design thing. What I didn't realize was that there's so much more to the business and so much more to the product than my piece of the pie. And I never really thought to think bigger about what I was doing. It wasn't until I went and got my MBA that I realized there's so much other things going on, and that actually a lot of companies do want designers to participate more strategically. They don't think to ask because designers also aren't jumping in. They're not asking. They're not putting themselves in that conversation. So only later did I realize I should be thinking about metrics. I should be asking people. I should be showing interest and empathy towards those cross-functional stakeholders, and that serving the business is part of my role, not just the users. And it's the balance between those two things that makes for a really successful and experienced designer. And so I wish I had thought about, for myself personally, my role as more of serving both of those entities, both of the customer, the user, and the business. And it would have probably changed my career pretty significantly.
You dropped something about an MBA. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to zoom in on the business and the user side. Is there a difference? Isn't the user the business?
That's a great question. I love that actually. I do think they need to be different. And I think what happens is a lot of businesses kind of roll them into one. And they think, oh, if we're doing something good for the business, it's also good for the user. That's not usually the case though. If you
I
look
would
at
say
like
the inverse. Like if you're doing something good for the user, it's good for the business.
See, that I do think is true. And so I do think one, if you're not explicit about separating those two things out, firstly, I think that's where design gets lost in the conversation. It's like, well, if we think the business and the user are the same, then just have the PM represent both. And then we'll work with engineering to execute it. And then where's the room for designers? So I actually teach some courses on product management, and I advocate for like, let's talk about the, you know, the customer user problem that we're solving and the business problem that we're solving and the feasibility of what we want to build as three separate things, which then makes it easier to have three separate people in the room having a balanced conversation about what to move forward with. I think when you conflate those two things, what happens is you can misorder them. So you have a lot of business saying this is good for the business, therefore, if it's good for the user, cool, that's great. And that's where like social media companies are selling your data. That's good for them financially. It's not good for you. The way that Airbnb approached everything was if we build something that solves people's real problems, if we deliver something that has real value to them, and we know that's the case, those business metrics are going to take care of themselves largely if we're building a good product for people. So I think those are two separate things. And if you order it, like you said, user first, the business metrics and success will follow. A lot of companies are just so focused on hitting their goals and their OKRs, and they're really incentivized to do that they can lose that user sense and that ordering of what's more important, the customer and building something that's good for them, or hitting my OKR so I get a promotion. That starts to get blurry. And then that's when you can start seeing product teams and businesses build the wrong thing or create a scandal or something like that.
Man, this is a can of worms that we can unpack for the next 3 hours, because the question is like, if your OKRs aren't aligned to delivering value to users, like what are your OKRs about? But I feel let's put that aside for a second. There are other things we want to talk about. So, but it is very interesting. You dropped the fact that doing an MBA, getting an MBA opened your eyes. Now can you take us back to the moment where you sort of, in your design position, thought, well, let's do an MBA? Like, not many design professionals take that route. What happened?
Yeah, that was a long journey, I feel like, to kind of arrive at that conclusion. So it started when I first started doing design. I was in high school, so I was maybe 16, 17. I had no idea how to pay for university, which in America is super expensive. Had no money saved and no plan. I'm like, this is going to happen. I'm going to be in school next year and it's going to be expensive. What do I do? And I just kind of discovered design. I had done art and kind of got increasingly more digital. I went from like drawing and pastels and all the kind of classics to photography, web design, and then kind of like graphic design. It kind of evolved into that more digital realm. So for me, what I did was start doing freelance right away when I'm 17 years old with as many people as I possibly could, because I liked the craft of design. I liked the puzzle of it. And I was always kind of working with businesses. And my first experience with design was running a business about design, a little agency, right? So I always felt like those two things were very married for me. I can't really break them apart from each other in my mind. I went to school and got my degree in graphic design, but kind of persuaded the business department to let me start taking 400 level marketing classes, even though I hadn't done like any of the prerequisites. So very high level marketing, and loved it and thought it was really interesting. As someone who had been running a business for a couple years, I put that on pause. I don't think people should go get a graduate degree like right out of, right when they're like 21. I wanted to have some years of experience. And there was a moment I was at Airbnb and Brian was talking to the design team at an offsite. And he said, there should be more designers in the boardroom. And I thought, you know what? Like, I do think that that's a good place for designers to be. We do need to have more voice. Not many people are prepared for that. And when you get there, you're not with other designers anymore. You're with a bunch of other people who are not designers, and you probably need to speak their language. So the MBA was something that was always in the back of my mind. Having taken business classes earlier, and then Brian saying that in that moment was like, maybe this is the company to do this. While I'm here, this is the moment to do this.
I'm curious, what would trigger, if it wasn't for that meeting where Brian, the CEO of the founder of Airbnb, would have made that statement, do you still think you would have pursued an MBA? Like, did you need that push or?
It was definitely always something that was kind of on my to-dos for my life. It was in that moment that I was like, I feel like this is like a sign from the universe that now is the right moment to do it. But I always knew I wanted to do it. And I had known people who had done it, and uh, something that was always on my radar. And I just needed that little like sign from the universe that now is the right time. And Airbnb generally was just such a supportive environment that it seemed like, all right, if I want to amplify my voice and a place where my voice is already really well heard, this seems like a good thing to pursue.
You're bringing in this MBA experience, this design experience into the conversation. And you just mentioned the separation between business and user. And you, I think, believe that if design professionals embrace the design, no, the business aspect, the business side, they will find more acceptance, they will find more understanding. But what does the business side entail for you? Like, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you talk to designers about, you should study business, and business is this insane category. Like, it's everything that's not design, right? So you could be talking about accounting or economics or statistics or marketing or whatever. And so I think it's silly and funny for two reasons. One, if you say go study business, it's like, well, what do you mean? Because that's a huge number of things. The inverse is also true, though, where designers are like, I don't think I need to study business. Be more specific. Do you mean I don't need to study accounting? You're probably right. Do you mean I don't need to know anything about negotiation or marketing or people management? You're probably not right. Those are probably things you should know. So, yeah, I think that it's good to be more specific. The classes that helped me the most, the topics that I dove into as part of the MBA that resonated were especially statistics, because so much of what we ship is based on an A/B test, and I had no idea how those were set up, how they were judged as successful, what a confidence interval was. We talked about statistical significance all the time and threw around that term, but I didn't know what it meant. I was like, "Yep, needs to be statistically significant." What the heck is that? So much of my work was dependent upon these A/B tests running successfully, and I had no idea what they were. I just had to trust that the data was correct, that we're analyzing the data correctly, we're making the right decisions, and then that decision might be kill Ryan's design. I would like to be part of that conversation because I want that, and I think it's the right thing to do. And I've spoken to customers, and something is off, but I didn't have the language. So that was the first thing that was really eye-opening. The second thing was negotiation, because whether you have data or evidence or anything, you can make a compelling argument, but you're always, if you're trying to persuade someone, if you want to be influential, if you want to have impact, you have to tell a CEO, here's what I think we should do and why. You have to push back against a PM who wants to kill something that you want to advocate for. Everything is a negotiation. And so understanding that this is a people problem and how we communicate and how we align to their incentives, that is something that designers can be really good at. That, getting people on board with your ideas is the job in a lot of ways at a certain level.
And especially in service design, where your design material is the organization, are the processes, and often also are the people. Like, especially in service design, you are dependent on the resources that you get. You're often creating the conditions. So interesting that you mentioned negotiation. Do you feel that this is more relevant to design than it is to marketing or accounting or development, engineering?
I don't know. I've never been an accountant, so I don't know that I can answer that from that perspective. I would suspect that it's especially important for anyone who is not in an inherent position of power. So if you're at a product-led organization and you're an associate PM and you already have more clout than the engineers and the designers coming right out of college because you have the word PM in your resume, probably negotiation skills are not like the most important for you, because you can just say something and order people around and they'll have to do what you say.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of a tragedy. Like, you should develop good people skills. You should develop good negotiation skills. And anyone who's got too much authority too early on in their careers, I don't think are picking up the right skills that'll really help them long term. So designers often don't have that inherent built-in authority and clout. And so I do think that that's one of the areas that if you are feeling like that's the case, you're feeling like I'm not getting traction with my ideas the way I want, probably some negotiation and sales and marketing skills will come in handy.
There have been stories circulating online about design being gaslighted. And I'm curious what your take is on this, because if we don't have this natural influence or cloud, um, like, is it a you problem or is it a me problem? So, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think I have a unique take on this. That's a big question. My take on this is because I feel like I walk in both worlds a little bit, where I'm a designer and I can see where designers are right, and I can see where designers feel like this is the case. And I've definitely been told like, you don't know what you're talking about. We'll make the decisions. Thank you very much. And that feels terrible, and it does happen. Um, I've also been on the business side and be like, a scene. And I try to, this is what I work with designers on. It is true that we don't ask those questions sometimes. We don't participate. I just spoke to a design manager yesterday who's like, my team wants nothing to do with business. They don't think it's relevant to them. They don't think it's their part of the job. They think profits and capitalism and business are kind of dirty. It's like, all right, try to convince the CEO of anything if that's your position. So if I were the CEO, I'm like, why do I have these people around? They are the people who are pushing pixels and making pretty stuff. That's great. That's fine. They have no interest in participating in this conversation, and they really don't get what we're trying to do here. So I think both can be right and both can be wrong. In either degree, it's too much. I will say, in terms of being gaslit, I think it really matters how we define that specifically. I saw some articles about that, and some of those things, yeah, can be described as kind of gaslighty. One of the examples I think in some of the articles I've read was like, it's gaslighting to say, describe your impact. It's like, I don't think that's gaslighting. I think if you want to be paid $100,000 to do your job, you should be able to talk about what the business is getting. That's the expectation of every function, is you should be able to say, look, here's what I'm doing for this business and why I should be around. I don't think designers are exempt from that or should think we're exempt from that. I don't think that question or that line of reasoning is out of bounds if you're a leader wanting to hire people. And if an engineer can say, here's what I deliver, or a marketing person can say, here's what I deliver, and the designer's like, that's gaslighting, I'm not going to answer that question. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the people who are going to answer the question, who are going to have a good answer for the question. And you're going to be like, I don't get those design people. So I think we need to be careful about throwing out that term. I think we need to be really specific about what that means. I don't think a business person wanting to understand, like, why should we hire more designers? What will we get for that? What does that do for us? How does that move our mission forward? I think those are fair questions, and we should be prepared to answer them.
Yeah. And the last point is really important. Like, are those questions coming out of a place of curiosity or out of judgment? Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I have a theory on this. If you've ever seen there's a bell curve, like a very famous bell curve, diffusion of innovations. This is something I teach designers a lot that they've not heard about. You've heard the terminology before, the idea of like there's early adopters or laggards, right? And it breaks down this bell curve of like what percentage of the population theoretically is an early adopter, and this could be of an idea or like a religion or a new technology. Like electricity. There are people who are like, yes, electricity, let's do it. And then there's a bunch of people who are like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get shocked to death, and I'm going to wait to make sure that this group of people doesn't get shocked, and then maybe I'll consider it. And then there was a group of people, the laggards, who were like, nope, whale oil lamps forever, and did not want to be brought along, right? And so any kind of new idea, there's people that are super excited, and there's people that are extremely resistant and want to push back. But there's this distribution of people. Over time, people warm up to the idea. They see evidence, they see statistics, they hear stories. They're like, okay, I wasn't into this smartphone thing before, or I don't really know what AI will do for my business. And then a bunch of people are going to show them and demonstrate that. And there are going to be a lot of case studies. And then people will warm up to the idea and they'll start to wrap their heads around it. I think that's true of design as well. You have these like early adopters, these innovators, like Airbnb and Apple and Linear and some of these companies that are like, yep, design's leading the way. That's unusual. You do have companies, that are laggards. They're like, why do we have designers? I don't know. They make pretty stuff. Put them in the back closet somewhere. Let them do their thing, but let's not pay attention to them or involve them in any way. What's great about this model is that most companies aren't either of those things. Like if you look at the model, the way it's taught in business school, it's like 16% of people are laggards, are really going to push back, and it's going to really hurt, and it's going to suck to be there, and it's going to feel probably disproportionately larger, like the industry is more oriented towards that. And I don't think that's the case. The designers I work with, the kind of middle, not the early adopters and not the laggards, kind of this middle group is like 66% of the population. And I think most businesses are there, where a lot of companies right now want more business value. They want more people to be more strategic. And I work with designers all the time that as soon as they start talking about the business a little bit more, the companies are very excited to bring them into that process because designers finally showed interest in what everyone else is doing. So my experience teaching like hundreds of designers over the last year has been that yes, there are people who are at companies that are very hostile towards design. Very few people are at a company that's like, heck yes, design leads the way. Most people are somewhere in the middle. Those companies are typically pretty willing to listen to designers behaving differently, bringing new data to the table, bringing their strategic perspective to the table. If we do it a certain way, a lot of businesses are open to that and excited about it once they figure it out.
So what is that certain way?
I think it starts with showing interest and signaling to the business that you want to be part of that conversation. That it's not just, you can't also be the type of designer that's like, no, business is not for me, that's for the rest of you. Designers do a good job of othering ourselves in our identity sometimes. Like we're not business people, we're creatives. Like we try to like make ourselves kind of this like special group, and then we're left out and we're not sure why. So the first thing is I describe this to designers sometimes of like, imagine there's, the business leaders, it's like a herd of black horses, running through the plains or something like that. You don't want to be a black horse, but you're like a zebra, right? You're like belong to the herd and you've got stripes. So you're a little different. You're kind of an outlier, but you're still part of the team, right? You're not a flamingo and everyone's like, what the heck is that? You don't want to other yourself and be like, we're creatives. We don't do that stuff. We do this pretty pixel stuff. So even just kind of rethinking about how we position ourselves, realizing that we should try to, if we want to win people over, emphasize their commonalities and start speaking their language and start asking questions about what they care about, why they care about those things. That really helps develop trust. And then that's when we can start being pulled in proactively the conversations that we may not have been pulled into earlier.
I've been in this industry for a while, getting close to 2 decades. And this conversation about speaking a different language, speaking the language of business, it's been here for at least the time that I've been here. Why haven't we been able to cross that gap yet?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have the right answer to that, but I have some theories. I think a lot of it, how I look at the industry and how it's evolved, has to do with the macroeconomic lens. That's what I think is happening to the industry right now. You've got, the macroeconomic environment is how much is our country as a whole growing, which changes how industries grow. It changes like what is the inflation going on, which changes what interest rates are, which makes money more expensive, which changes how people hire. So I always look back at like, what is the biggest picture thing? And it's usually the economy overall. That's why right now it's like we have people like laying people off, not hiring designers. It's because money's more expensive all of a sudden. And it wasn't a few years ago. The businesses changed their behavior because businesses are made up of people who are incentivized and change their behavior. And you see all these kind of downstream effects. I wonder if kind of one of my theories is that, at least in America, for the last number of years before the pandemic, which kind of ended this golden era, from like 2008, 2009 to the pandemic, we had just the longest bull run in the stock market in American history. Everything right now is like the best or the worst it's ever been. So it's like, it's this really chaotic, tumultuous time. But I wonder that designers were able to say, firstly, design leaders were able to become leaders really quickly because money was flowing, everything was great. You're like, let's have an innovation team. And people are like, yeah, this is the era of like IDEO, and, Facebook's becoming a significant force. Google's becoming an even more significant force culturally as people are hiring. I kind of wonder if the bar was lower, and while we understood that we should be more participants in the business, it didn't maybe require as much as it does now in terms of actually having tactics and in a pressure tested situation that works significantly. So while we understood that, hey, we're part of a business, we should talk and understand our business, did we have to really fight for that and prove it Maybe not to the same degree that we definitely do now. And now it's like, great, yes, we should be part of the business. How specifically, though, should we do that? And I see a lot of even very experienced business or design leaders struggling right now because I don't know that we've like developed that muscle as like this is the test. I don't know that we're ready or have developed those muscles in specific a way or tactical a way to really, meet the moment. And so that's one of my theories on how like the economy has evolved and the conversation has been there, but have the tactics been enough in an environment that was golden compared to an environment right now?
Interesting. I would love to see some
I don't want to be
comments.
judgmental. I don't know
No,
if
no,
that's
no, no,
right,
no.
but that's
I love the hypothesis. So, um, I'm curious to your experience having been in a company like Airbnb where it's basically design led and design doesn't have to explain or justify its value towards a lot of most organizations are driven by management, right? So it's focused on efficiency, getting the cost of doing business down, standardizing things. There is a different way. It's very focused at value extraction, whereas design is often focused on value creation. And I experience, and I hear that a lot, that's the tension that is really hard to overcome. If you meet somebody who's focused on value extraction and you're like, we're going to create value, okay.
sure.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that could be true. Different businesses operate differently depending on their industry. And then one thing I really focus on is depending on their stage. So you might have a business that is extremely mature and they want to just make sure that everything is as efficient as possible. And I've literally heard executives at mature stage companies say, we're not innovating anymore, right? We're now trying to maintain our dominance. We're going to dial things in. We're going to be more operational. We're just going to refine. We're on a good trajectory. We've built the thing we needed to build, and now we're just going to optimize the heck out of it. Eventually, that will cause the business to fail. Because if you don't innovate, other companies will come. And that's what happens to every company, is this company life cycle. And so companies do get stuck there. That's why they eventually fail. But you can kind of ride that wave for a long time if you want to, which might be okay. And this is one of the perspectives I try to bring to designers. It's like, maybe that is the right thing for that business, and that's fine. Let's just not go work there. Or if we go work there, let's be eyes open about what it is we'll be doing, right? Or how we'll be used. And if that's not the type of work I want to do, I'm going to look at the company stage. I'm going to look at the company culture. I'm going to look at what they've launched recently. I'm going to look at and investigate which function is leading. If it's like sales led or PM led, I'm probably going to, factor that into my decision making. But I'm not going to go in there trying to sell something people don't want to buy. I'm going to look for a company that wants to buy what I'm already selling and try to get as close to that as possible. I think that sometimes those things you're describing are right for businesses. It's just maybe not the place that I want to be.
I totally agree. The fact is that I think a lot of design professionals are in those situations, whether that's by accident or somebody has told them a different story and reality after 2 years has caught up on them. And they have to, like, sure, you can resign and try to find a place that appreciates your qualities. But that's a quite drastic measure. Do you have any tips or advice for people who are in those situations where it is mostly product or management led?
Yeah, I want to understand, and maybe you can provide a little more detail on experience you've had. I think a lot of what I focus on then is let's understand what the incentives are, and let's try to, I teach a whole lecture on this of let's just identify what environment we're working within. I do think there's typically an overlap. I don't want to be too broad where it's like extraction versus creation. If you're in an extraction environment, you're screwed. Then it's like, okay, you could really be in trouble and you do need to move. But often there are ways that if we're trying to optimize something, then we should just pitch what we're doing as aligned to that. Maybe I don't believe that any one project or initiative has one type of value. Typically, we're oriented to think that way often, where it's like, here's your OKR, here's your success metric, go hit that. to the exclusion of thinking about literally anything else. But never does one project just affect one team, one type of customer, one any of these things, right? So I try to help designers zoom out and think about, yes, that's your goal. You're trying to be more operationally efficient. Let's say we're building a design system to make engineering and design more operationally efficient, right? So we can ship things faster. The work is better because it's all pre-coded components. We have fewer bugs because we've all stress test those components and we use them across the board. Great. That's going to save us a ton of money. That's operationally efficient. We're going to cut costs in that way. That doesn't mean there's not value creation in that process in terms of making things more efficient for users. They learn those patterns. They can now move through tasks faster. That leads to like higher conversion rate or, higher success rate on the task we want them to complete. So most projects have some kind of cost saving component and some value creation component. So what I try to help designers do is think about, yes, there's two sides of those coins. Like rarely does one project move just one of those. And what I'm going to do then is orient my narrative and my pitch, my kind of marketing campaign to whoever with the side that they want to hear. And that might vary from executive to executive or team to team. They all have different goals and priorities. But I want to be, if I can zoom out and view the big picture, nimble with my messaging.
You mentioned statistics, negotiation, but this sounds like another skill or quality that we should hone.
The three kind of areas I think about the most are sales, marketing, and negotiation. And then the other two are statistics and macroeconomics. Those are kind of like the five things that have shaped my perspective for different reasons. I feel like marketing, sales, and negotiation are all about helping get an outcome you want by aligning to things that other people want. We have to find that intersection of what I'm trying to sell you and what you want to buy, and we'll all be happy in that environment. And a good negotiation is that. It's not a fight, it's a dance, and you want to find that intersection. So I really think that that's where, having done a lot of freelance, I think designers should do freelance because you learn to sell, and that's really, you learn to like talk to the customer, do customer research, find out what they want, and then repeat that back to them in a way they're like, great, you are absolutely going to help me do the things I want to do. You can take that and apply that internally in-house as well. So I think sales, negotiation, and marketing are kind of this nice bundle of skills. Even thinking about like go-to-market strategy, those things, how do I get something out to people in a way that they're excited about it and want more of it? You can apply that to your persuasion on a project. You can apply that to design as a whole. How do I get more businesses excited about design and hiring more designers and into that like category of companies that are excited about design leading and not just like not sure yet or really, really resistant to it?
There's a reason why I ran a course on how to sell service design with confidence for a few years. I stopped that, but I couldn't agree more that sharpening your sales skills, and sales has a dirty connotation. There's like a stigma around sales, especially in the design industry, but we are already doing it, just not consciously and not very well in many occasions.
I think we need to break it down. Again, this is one of those, like, you say business, people are like, but it's like, okay, that's a huge category. Let's break it down and be more specific. And then we can move forward with the parts that we like and leave behind the parts we don't. Let's learn about marketing. Let's not learn about accounting. I think sales is the same thing. You say sales. I think sales has this brand for designers that we're trying to sell something to someone that they don't want or they don't need, and we're pushing it on them. And I really think that is not an effective sales technique. That's not a good salesperson. You should always be finding something that people want and then saying, here's how I can help you get the things you want. I do think designers have a natural instinct for that. That's why we do customer research. That's why we go talk to users, right? To say, what do you need? And then they say, this is what I need. Like, cool, we're going to go build that thing. We should apply that same type of process and thinking to internal stakeholders, to our executives, to our PMs. Like, what do you need? Cool, I can go build that thing for you and deliver it for you. Doing user research is part of a sales process for creating a valuable product, and we can do that internally too. And it's not a dirty thing. It's not pushing something. It's not for the sake of profits. It's not going to, pollute or destroy value. We're actually dialing into something that provides value. That's, like you said, we're value creators. We can do that with users. We can do that internally, and we are comfortable with one framing of it with users. if we can get comfortable with using those same skills that we're already comfortable with, that aren't dirty, that aren't bad, and just apply it internally, we should feel comfortable with those same tactics we already feel comfortable with. We just have to apply it in a different direction.
So what's the biggest roadblock from doing this internally?
Some of it is external and some of it's internal. So I do think there are businesses that are kind of not sure about designers, and there's stakeholders. You could have a business that's like, I don't know, and you could have just a jerk you're working with, right? And it's really difficult to break through that person. I think some of it's also internal to designers, though. I think uh, you know, like you said, the kind of gaslighting articles that we read, like we hear the horror stories, right? And I think then we think that it's more disproportionately large than it actually is. And that's human nature. You hear about something negative and it kind of gets larger. Like everyone's afraid of shark attacks. I'm going to say this as someone who swims with sharks. Everyone's afraid of shark attacks, but shark attacks happen so infrequently. But they're really scary. And so then we think it's like, I'm not going to go in the ocean because what if? It's like the statistically, the math on this is so small, but it's just going to change a lot of people's behavior. A lot more companies are kind of hostile or very, very, very skeptical towards design than shark attacks. So it's not a perfect example, but I think if we get so hung up on, well, what's the perfect way to describe our value? Or if I say this, everyone's going to push back and I'm going to have to fight and I don't want to do that. I think we get scared and don't want to put ourselves out there and don't maybe kind of get caught up in that conversation in a not productive way, that we don't try these tactics and we don't try new things. And what I've seen working with, a few hundred designers over the last year is that largely those people are very successful when they try new tactics and new things. So there are ways to handle the stakeholders who are totally jerks. Most of them are not. Most businesses are not totally hostile to design. And so I'm a big advocate for the only thing in my life I can control is me. And so I'm going to start with me and then just see what happens. That doesn't mean everything is totally my responsibility. And I think you alluded to this earlier. Is like, is it design? Is it the business? It's both, but I can't control all the people in the business. I can control me and how I bring myself to the table and then try to influence how people perceive me. And that works for a lot of people.
This also a challenge that we have to rethink and reframe maybe what our identity as design professionals is, as in doing user research. These are the examples that we've seen. This is what we get from our role models. We don't have a lot of role models that tell us that we need to be great salespeople internally. So this taps into our identity.
Yeah, I think that's a huge barrier. I think the three things that are barriers for designers is how any type of rigidity is going to be a problem. If you're rigid about your tools, you're rigid about your process, or you're rigid about your identity, you're going to face resistance. And this is just a reality. People are just not going to agree with you. No one agrees with everyone all the time. Whether you're a designer or PMs especially have to pitch and sell constantly. They're just good at it, typically. They don't have as much authority, I think, as we often think they do. So any type of rigidity, the market's going to shift, business expectations are going to shift, and you're going to be stuck. If you're like, nope, I'm the pretty pixel pusher person, and I use Figma, and I don't want to use AI, and I don't want to talk about business, yeah, it's going to be really hard for you. The things are going to move around you, whether you want to move or not. So I think I've seen a lot of designers, maybe you're right. There are some leaders in this space who are talking about this, and there are people like me who are teaching a lot of it. I think what's happening is designers are starting to wake up now that this golden era of the biggest boom ever has ended. It's been a few years. We're realizing post-pandemic what the post-pandemic world is shaping up to be. And a lot of designers are hungry for the business side, and they realize that it's a necessary and missing component to their skill set, especially at a certain point in their career. If you're a junior designer, you're like, you have a ways to go. You still got to learn Figma. You still got to get good at basic stakeholder management stuff. Once you're a senior product designer, you kind of hit this wall where learning more tactical design skills is not actually what's going to help you. It's negotiation, operations, statistics. It's the business type of things. And if you think about being a chief design officer, you're only surrounded by business people and you're doing mostly business type activities. So that is the trajectory. I think more designers are waking up to the value of getting those skills earlier in their careers. And then it's about, finding people who teach it and can share that information with you.
Yeah. One of the things I've been advocating a lot over the years is if you want to become a better design professional, don't read design books, right?
Yeah.
Read a book on strategy or statistics or psychology or those
Yeah.
behavioral economics. Those are the things that will get you to the next level as a design professional.
I saw that the other day. I saw something posted. It's like, what are your favorite books you recommend to other designers? And it was designers pitching design books to designers. And we have a kind of insular
Hmm.
culture in that way. I think it has to do with our shared identity where we don't branch out enough and we all kind of provide the same resources to each other. The books I always recommend are like How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think is a really effective, good, like very accessible book for how you should think about bringing yourself to any type of relationship, especially work. 48 Laws of Power is really effective in terms of how to work well with people and not shoot yourself in the foot, which is what I did a lot of the time in my career, was just make mistakes that I didn't need to make, that led me in a different path. And so I absolutely agree with you. There are at a certain point in your career, you should stop like just trying to focus on design. There's In economics, we call it diminishing returns. You're just not going to see the same growth curve anymore at a certain point in your career. People are going to expect more of you. And the answer isn't just do more design forever. It's you have to start branching out.
One of the things that we haven't tapped into yet, and that is a struggle that I hear often, when you start moving up and doing more strategic design work, um, in service design, that's often the case. It's becoming more and more challenging to point to an outcome, to a result that you can accredit to yourself. Like if you're working on very tangible things, it's really easy to say, I've delivered this, I've shipped this. When you're working again as a service design professional across teams, you're doing a lot of good things, but like what did you do? Like it becomes harder. How do you what is your advice or message or approach in those situations? Because businesses value people and skills and outcomes that are very easy to put in a box. And when you stop doing that, like you don't fit into the system anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, this is one of those areas where I wonder how much do designers worry about it and stress about it versus how much it is the reality. And we talk about how, you know, are designers held to like a higher bar than everyone else? And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I think it gets hard at any level, right? If you're leading a team, and I talk to managers about this all the time. I'm leading a team. How do I talk about the value of my work if I didn't do the tangible things? I don't know that PMs struggle with that. Does the head of product be like, well, I didn't produce those PRDs, so what value do I have? I think designers we start so tactically, and our work is valued for our tactical work. We have a hard time evolving our thinking beyond the deliverables, and so I think at a certain level, it becomes about these things we've been talking about. It comes about influence, like because I helped shape the direction of this towards something that was positive. I helped influence this outcome. I worked with stakeholders. I rallied the team. I got people aligned. A lot of it becomes kind of product managey in a way, which is good, which we know is valuable to the business. The person who like gets the team on board, can you connect that back to a specific metric impact? Like if the team weren't aligned, it would have been 9% lift. And because they were aligned, it was 11% lift. I think designers worry about how can we attribute these perfect numbers. A lot of business decisions are not perfect numbers ever. And so you don't see a lot of other teams either being held to that standard or even trying to attempt that. When you're working in a cross-functional environment, even just as like earlier in your career as a designer, it's about the work of the PMs and the designers and the engineers all doing this produced some lift. If you're in an environment where the PMs are like, no, I own that metric, it's like, well, you wouldn't, PMs don't ship anything by themselves. So you shouldn't be in a position. And this is a negotiation tactic. If you're in a position where people are saying like, look, I own those metrics, I was responsible for that. It's like, okay, we need to reframe the conversation then, because all right, we just want work on the next project and need the role engineering. Let's see how far you guys get on your own. Okay, cool. Let's establish then we do have value being there, and let's stop then trying to like nitpick about who gets what percentage of the outcome pie. Let's just say we win as a team. And so you can try to reframe those things in that way, and that makes the conversation more accessible.
Yeah, I do feel, and maybe it's getting more less and less, but people get hung up on the attribution aspect and sort of get imposter syndrome that they aren't
Yeah.
able to quantify how much they've contributed to a specific aspect. And that's not
Yeah.
necessary. That's what you're saying, right?
I try to coach designers on avoiding that conversation. And I think it's a very difficult slash impossible thing to do. And the better strategy, I think, is to demonstrate your value in a way that and talk about your value in a way that business people understand, and you don't even go to that level, right? I think that level gets brought up like, okay, well, calculate for me this number, because they're not seeing other evidence. And so that's the only thing you think of as a business person. You're like, I was
Mm-hmm.
taught ROI,
Mm.
I went to business school, I want that number from you. The first thing you should do is be like, that's probably not the right ask. This is a customer or asking for a specific feature. And you're like, you're asking me for a faster horse. That's let me look at what you're trying to get at, which is, what am I getting from my designers, right? So if they're saying, what's the specific number, you can start with, okay, what I'm hearing from you is you want to understand how we're contributing. That backs the conversation out to a level that you can actually start participating in it. If you go down the rabbit hole of trying to calculate, you will not win that argument, because there is no perfect way to calculate it. Many of the things we do cannot be calculated, but that doesn't mean they don't have value. And you run into the attribution problem. How do you slice up the pie if, like, I gave a talk about this the other day. It's like, because Ryan was in the room for that meeting for 47 minutes, it created X dollars of value. It like doesn't work at a certain scale. And so you have to, if you're getting forced into that conversation, don't run with it, don't embrace it, try to back out of it. And what I work with designers on doing is, let's try to talk about our work as holistically valuable to the business as possible, so people don't think they need a perfect number. What they're really looking for is, help me understand the value you're bringing to the table, which is, again, not gaslighting. Totally fair question. And so many business decisions are made every single day based on like a rough feel of, this seems good for us, so let's just move forward. It's based on consensus, it's based on perception, it's not based on numbers. And even when you have numbers, they're usually not accurate, or they're a guesstimation. Like, a number of times I've seen a PM be like, it'll produce 10% lift. Like, we haven't built anything. You don't know that. But it's like okay for people to guesstimate, using numbers. I think designers need to realize that that's an okay business practice, is to give it
Mm-hmm.
your best guess. You don't have to have the perfect thing, and that's not a reasonable place to be. Let's try to avoid that conversation as a whole.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, the key word that you mentioned is evidence. Or what are they like? What is your stakeholder trying to prove, or like, what's the feeling that they are looking for? And
Yeah.
if they are looking for evidence, numbers are one way to provide evidence, but there are many different ways you can provide evidence that your work has made an impact, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the projects go through different phases, right? A lot of times you want evidence of, are we doing the right thing? Are we heading in the right direction before we've built anything? I talk to designers all the time, and this is where I think we get rigid about, I said, identity, process, and tools. We get rigid about process. It's like, unless I have user research, how do I talk about the value of my work? Or unless we've run an A/B test, how do I talk about the value of my work? One project I did at DoorDash. So when I joined DoorDash, there were 8 engineers, no PMs. I sat with the founders in an old animal hospital in Palo Alto, and there were like 30 of us. It was not glamorous. The building did not have air conditioning in the summer in California. It got very hot. And one of the projects that I led was more flexible pay for drivers. And I wanted to pitch this and say, look, we should, typically, if you think about the persona of a DoorDash driver, this is someone who's kind of doing this as a side hustle to make ends meet. They're maybe financially insecure. And so what they want to do is, have a little more flexibility in their lives. We were paying them out once a week, and we weren't paying them very flexibly. Everyone else was paying them, on demand or every single day, and we were the ones paying them out the slowest. And so I kind of made the argument like, look, this is almost putting on a PM hat, but you can do that sometimes, and it works as a designer. Saying like, look, we don't know the demand of this, but I know that every competitor is doing this better than we are. Let's do some competitive analysis. Let's look at some industry benchmarks and make an argument for, this is something worth pursuing. And if you're the person that identifies the problem, it's like, we wouldn't have even thought about doing that unless Ryan pushed us to do it. then no one's asking you like, well, how much value did you create? It's like the whole thing
Hmm.
wouldn't have happened. And that's
Yeah.
where PMs get a lot of credit. PMs find the opportunities and pitch them successfully. And then it's like, well, it wouldn't have happened unless PM led the way. And so that's why they get a disproportionate amount of credit. Designers can do that as well, even in a non-design led environment. If you're thinking and acting more like a PM, we have to expand our skill set. We have to look at competitive analysis, not just user research, those types of things.
I think a lot of people would be surprised if design professionals come into the room with a competitive analysis. It would be awesome if more people would do so. Yeah.
More designers, yeah.
Yeah.
Why aren't we looking at data from past experiments we've run? Why aren't we looking at what the competitors are doing? Why aren't we looking at industry benchmarks, right? And user research, right? We want to be able to contextualize everything within our world of customers, but there are so many other tools that we're not tapping into. And then what I've experienced with the people that I've worked with and the designers that I teach is when they start doing this, they get double takes. People are like, executives are, whoa, where did this come from? Why are you talking? You're talking about, you're giving me a presentation on metrics right now. You're talking about competitive analysis. And that is the world of those executives. And usually they're like, we're on the same page. You're aligned to the way I work and the way I think and the things I care about. And as a designer, you're still going to bring in your values, your empathy, your user research, your skills that you care about. But because you've expanded your scope a little bit and you're starting to speak that same language, they're very receptive to, you're talking about data and competitive analysis, and you're talking about user research too. I'm going to be very interested in what you have to say. That works for a lot of people.
And the good thing is it's so closely tied to our existing skill set, like the aspect of visual thinking, presenting complex, reducing complexity into models and frameworks. We already know how to do this. And I think it's also a lot of fun. It's not just helpful. It's actually a lot of fun. What I'm getting from this conversation and conversations around business and design in general is I think people need to consciously make the decision whether or not they are interested in moving into this direction. Because one could say, competitive analysis, like this is not what I signed up for. Yeah, I just want to focus more on the craft and be an individual contributor. Like this is just distraction from the thing that I love, where my passion is. And that's fair. And I think you should embrace that and celebrate that. But if you sort of feel that your influence isn't at the level that you want, and you want to be more strategic, you want to have bigger say, then you have almost no other option than to move into the direction that we've talked about today, right?
Yeah, I think that brings up a great point, right? If you want to focus on the craft and you want your career to be oriented that way, and you're just going to keep your head down and just knock those things out. I have friends who are illustrators. That's what they want to do. That's totally fine. We need those people. That is a completely legitimate path for you to take. Again, to your point, though, if you start to face resistance, if you start to feel like your career isn't on the trajectory you want it to be. And I felt this way. I had a lot of ideas and no one wanted to listen to the designer on these ideas, right? And so I felt like the role of the PM was just to say no. I was like, you're not listening to me. You're just telling me no all the time. And you're not even like having the conversation with me. You're just saying, that's not a priority, end of conversation. I was like, that doesn't feel good. It made me feel burned out. It made me feel undervalued. I didn't get promotions when other people got promotions. Some businesses I worked at never promoted any designers, but they promoted everyone else. And it's like, that's not good. So if you're seeing outcomes that you don't like and you want something to change, then there are things you can do to change, run an experiment. There's so many things we should do that we do with our jobs all the time that we should apply internally when we want to make a change in our career. Like run an experiment, start talking about the business side a little bit more, see who's interested in it. If that suddenly the CEO is like, whoa, Ryan started talking about business, let's put him on that most strategic project coming up. Boom, there's your answer, right? If it doesn't work, then try another tactic. But if you're not in the position you want to be in and you don't want to leave your job, but you want some different type of outcome, you're going to have to try some different tactics. Some of them will work, some of them won't work. I tell people all the time, there's no silver bullets here, but it's about kind of continuing to take bites at that apple and hack away and see, like, can I get in there? You might try a few different things, but there's some combination of things that typically works for most designers. if they're flexible, if they're nimble, if they're willing to experiment, if they're willing to try new tactics. And I think one thing you said at the beginning is like, that's not part of my job. And my whole thesis is, again, you've got art and you've got business, and design is in between both of those things, right? We're visually solving problems for users. We're also solving problems for the business. This is part of the job. We just don't acknowledge it. And so I think by saying like, look, actually, this has been part of my job the whole time. And really, if I start to embrace that side of things, I will. If you want people to not think of you as a pixel pusher, don't just push pixels. You have to do something else to give them something else to think about. It's a branding exercise.
Mm.
So yeah, if you want more or want something to be different, be the leader on that. Try different things, run them as experiments, see what happens. But you can go into one meeting and make a comment about competitive analysis. That could be your experiment, and just see whose eyes light up. I literally just started teaching a class yesterday. Someone already started deploying some of these tactics, and their PMs were like, this is awesome. It's like day one, this can make a difference. So yeah, like, if you have a certain mission in mind or trajectory in mind for your career, if you're on the path you want to be, then keep doing that. If you're not, then make a change and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Ryan, we tend to wrap the show up with a question because we believe better questions are more interesting than the right answer. If you could leave us with something to think about after this episode, what would that be?
I think I would, if I were to kind of pose a provocative question to the audience, and say, why not? If you want something to be different, like, why not try something different? Like, why not? We think about, business and design as a whole. If you think about business, it just sounds like this big, overwhelming thing. If we break it down, one negotiation tactic is, don't argue against someone's position in a negotiation, argue against their interests, right? So that's, someone says something in a negotiation, I want this, that's their position. What's the underlying motivation behind that? If they say everything has to be run behind an A/B test, their underlying motivation is, I don't want to be wrong, I don't want to get fired, right? Designers have empathy. We can look beyond the ask and look underneath and start to solve the problems underneath. We do that all the time. Why not try that internally? Why not think about things that way? That's like a very tangible example. If you say, don't just study business, don't just study negotiation, just do that one thing with people and see what happens. Another good one thing to do is ask your PMs about the metrics. What are the success metrics? How do they want to hit those? What happens if they hit those? What are the consequences as a team if we don't hit those? Even just showing curiosity and empathy towards people is going to develop trust. We do that with users all the time. Do that internally. Why not? Give it a shot and see what happens. I think we get hung up on, people aren't going to take me seriously, and that imposter syndrome. Let's test that out. Let's see what happens if we pivot our approach a little bit. And so I think that's, I think if everyone just started doing some of these things, we could change the way the whole tech industry views the whole design industry. And I've seen, I've been working with designers and teaching designers this for almost a year and a half now. And the response that a lot of people get is extremely positive. So for anyone who's like, I don't know, it's like, why not give it a try? A lot of this works for a lot of people.
That's a good question to think about. Why not? Why aren't we doing this yet? Ryan, if people want to learn more about you and your work, what's the best place to do so?
Yeah, so my website is acceleratedesign.com. I teach on Maven. You can just Google me or search for me on Maven. I've actually got 3 courses right now. One is describing the ROI of design, which is how do we talk about our value as designers through a business lens that other people will understand, non-designers will understand. I just launched a PM masterclass for designers. If they're in a place where they want to just deliver more value as a designer, starting to be a little more strategic about the way you're talking about the product and shaping the product. We go through the end-to-end life cycle of building a product. And then for designers who really are stuck and saying like, look, I just don't want to work here anymore, I just launched a career and job search strategy course where we're going to look at like, how do you actually get into these companies? How do you frame your work in a business lens to get them interested in hiring you? So those are the things that I'm trying to bring to the design industry to help designers. If people just don't understand what they do, or they understand and they just want to deliver more value, or they really just want to go to a better place that'll be receptive to them. That's how I'm trying to help designers.
Awesome. We'll make sure all the relevant links are, as always, in the show notes. Ryan, thank you for what you're doing. You bring a lot of value to the design community. It's awesome to have you on the show and to hear all the things that you're thinking about and contributing to. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
This conversation was a great reminder that we have more power than we sometimes realize. We can all be more proactive in shaping our careers and advocating for the value of design. And the best part is that we don't have to become completely different people to do it. We can leverage the skills we already have as design professionals to become even more effective communicators and leaders. So, I want to thank Ryan again for the great conversation. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me a one big favor. Click the like button on this video if you haven't done so already. And while you're at it, leave a short comment. Not to feed the YouTube algorithm, but to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.